One of Victor's significant contributions is his concept of the rainforest, a metaphor he pioneered to describe how successful innovation ecosystems like Silicon Valley thrive through interconnected elements, diverse ideas, and perspectives that work in harmony. He co-authored the book, The Rainforest, The Secret to Building the Next Silicon Valley, received the gold medal for Book of the Year from Forward Reviews for its transformative approach to economic growth. And Victor's work has inspired global leaders to rethink how to foster entrepreneurship. And his philosophy is embodied in the name of the very building we're in today, the Lobo Rainforest, a symbol of the dynamic innovation ecosystem here in New Mexico. It's an honor to have Victor here today to share his insights. Please join me in welcoming Victor Hwang to the stage.
Thank you, Lisa. That was way too kind. Really, I really appreciate your friendship, your partnership through the years. And I really appreciate being back in New Mexico. I just love this state so much. Some of you know this, but this is the state where I got engaged to my wife. And so it holds a special significance to me. And I've been here many, many times. And just it's the kind of state where you just fall back in love with it every time you come back. The land of enchantment really has a special draw and a special quality. So thank you. It's always a pleasure to be back here. So hello, this is me. I've been doing this work around entrepreneurship and innovation and building economic prosperity for, I can't believe it now, almost 25 years. And so at some point you do this and you kind of become the OG or a dinosaur as you stick around long enough. But so I'm in the business of, I decided the business of economic growth is what I call it, which is how do you actually take what people have and create economic prosperity out of it? And this is a journey that actually started way back for me. And as Lisa mentioned, this is 13 years ago now, the book, The Rainforest, came out. And it's been remarkable to watch what's happened ever since. And this building is this living embodiment of the idea. And New Mexico has really been at the forefront of taking some of these new cutting-edge innovative ideas and how you build economic prosperity through entrepreneurship and innovation and bringing those to life. So I'm going to talk with you today about the importance of New Mexico, the importance of where we are in this country today, and how the renewal of this country is going to depend on entrepreneurship. And what's happening in New Mexico is a great example of what can be done everywhere across the country. So coming to life, and every time I come back to the rainforest, I have to admit, Lisa, it's a bit of a pinch me to see a book sort of in living embodiment. Most books, never make it off the shelf, but to actually walk into a book is a kind of a really interesting thing. So thank you for the experience of being able to walk into a book. But if it goes back a bit further, entrepreneurship actually holds a very special place in my life. This is my grandfather. He actually ran a little retail store back in Taiwan. This is going back now. That's me with the tube socks going up to my knee. This is in the I think the late 70s, so it wasn't out of fashion. It's probably in fashion again with the Gen Z kids doing all kinds of interesting fashion tricks. But so going to a store and seeing it always sort of held a special fascination for me. And then my parents came to the country seeking the American dream. And so they came to the country with $300 and 2 bags of laundry, and they still have these burlap bags with the address written on it of where they were coming. And so they came as educators, and they sought the American dream. And one of the things they had to do in the process of doing that was, at a certain point when I was in high school, I applied to college, and I was lucky enough to get into Harvard, but they couldn't afford to send me. And so one of the things they had to do was to take a second mortgage out on their house. So they took everything they owned and put it on the line. And the other thing they did is they started a business on the side. One of those things that started in the evenings and the weekends and eventually grew to become a little business that actually was able to sustain, put me and my sister through college and then sustain them through their careers and into retirement. And so I've seen the power of entrepreneurship, but I have also seen how hard it was for them. So we created they were able to create some wealth for themselves, created the jobs around them, and then it also transformed Austin, Texas, which is where they were. But it was so hard. It was sleepless nights. It was lots of struggle, really confusion about how do you do this? How do you even file a business? And what's an LLC? What's a S Corp? What's a C Corp? How do you build a business? How do you bring in external financiers? How do you recruit people? How do you, how do you market? How do you sell? All this was so foreign to them. But eventually they figured this out. But one of the things that I kept struggling with was, why is it that hard to do something that ought to be pretty natural? In fact, this is one of the most natural human things you can do, is to take the value that you want to create in the world and bring it to life. And then one of the interesting things is when I went to Harvard, I finally realized that the ways that we study the ways that we run the country, the ways that we run, study economics or grow economies, or the way we run governments, actually doesn't take into account the ordinary person, like my parents, the struggles that they deal with, the challenge they deal with. And in fact, the way that we run economies tends to think of folks like my parents and every entrepreneur out there as like these fungible commodities. We're replaceable. If one doesn't work, someone else will come along. But that's just not true, because it's so hard. There isn't always someone else that's going to come and fill that role. And what you do in building something brand new that doesn't exist before is a huge challenge. And it's not something that you can take for granted. And so how do you build a society from the bottom up? So one of the things I've really been thinking a lot about is, what is the state of the American dream today? And this is sort of, if you think about where we are in 2025, the beginning of the year, we just got through an election season in this country, but there is this sense that's pervasive in this country of a sort of pessimism or division or dysfunction. Like, why can't we do stuff anymore? Why are things not working the way we think they should? And this sort of cuts across all levels. It's not just at the national level. I think there's this pervasive sense that this used to be, at least the way we think of ourselves, is this can-do country. But there's also a sense that people just can't, things just don't seem to work. And so what I've done is I've actually spent a lot of time out in the country. One of the great benefits of the work I do and through the work at Right to Start is I get to go out there and see what's happening out at the country, where the level of people like my parents are, where the ordinary people are. And so I've been actually, just in the last 3 years, I've taken 3 major road trips across the country to meet with entrepreneurs, to meet with the entrepreneurial communities, to meet with people, policymakers, leaders, business people, executives, and then community leaders about what's happening in the country. And so the first trip I actually took from DC to KC. I was living in Kansas City at the time. And so hit a number of cities and states across the way. And then this was in 2022. After being stuck at home for a couple of years with COVID, all that. And so I just had to get out and start driving. The next thing I did is, this was in 2023, I actually started from Southern California and drove all the way to Arkansas, and got to visit a bunch of places along the way, including stopping through New Mexico, where I spent time with Zach Ben and met him out here. I don't know if Zach's here, but had an amazing experience meeting him and learning about what was happening in the tribal communities. And then coming through here in Albuquerque and meeting with Alice Loy and others, as well as the team at UNM here. And then just last year, I decided to go all out. And so I drove all the way from Southern California all the way to Washington, D.C. So we hit, I've lost count now. I think it's like 15 cities across 13 states. And this was just last fall. And really got the snapshot of the country in the heat of the election season, and trying to get a sense on what was happening everywhere. And so you can see some of these beautiful pictures of the people, including Zach and Alice and so many other people I met along the way. I will say one thing, which is, if you really start to feel pessimistic about this country, or just questioning what this country has, just get out there and meet people, and you fall back in love with this country all over again. It is remarkable. And I've traveled to well over 50 countries in my life. I've been to all 50 states. And this place is a special, special place. It's a special country, and New Mexico is a very special state. And if you get out there, you spend some time out in the communities with real people, you really do get reinvigorated and re-inspired. So, and then we ended in Washington, D.C. in this last one, where we met with the members of Congress, the chairs of the Entrepreneurship Caucus in the House, who hosted a celebration for us on Capitol Hill, met with the administrator, and then we brought like a dozen people we met across the country to join us. in DC to meet with the SBA administrator and the members of Congress to share what they were finding, entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial champions across the country. So anyways, it's been a remarkable few years of just getting out there. So what did I learn? So there are 4 things I think I learned that I want to share with you from being out there and meeting thousands of entrepreneurs and people supporting entrepreneurs in the country. One thing is that this country is ready for a reboot. People seem to want to fix this thing and get it going again. There is the sense that we have a lot of the core operating system in place, but we need to reboot it. And so that's just a feeling that's out there, and it's very pervasive. The other thing is that entrepreneurs are at the heart of this renewal, this rebooting, that the entrepreneurs are the front lines. And so one of the things I found is in every place you go, even in the hardest hit places, the places where things look the worst, where the numbers look terrible, you will find the people that are leading the charge to change it are the entrepreneurs. They're doing something. I've been in hollowed out communities in downtowns, small towns where it looks like everything's falling apart. And the people that are fixing it are the entrepreneurs. Those storefronts that look like they're empty, you go behind those empty storefronts and you find there's entrepreneurs that are making the future happen. And that's very exciting. And it's because entrepreneurs build the future. Entrepreneurs are the ones that actually see what could be better and actually make it happen. In fact, I found that our leaders are actually followers. Our leaders follow the entrepreneurs. When the entrepreneurs get out front, then the leaders will follow. And this has been a remarkable realization because it means that the way we think of the world, if you read the news, we see everyone kind of waits around for our leaders to do stuff, but it's actually upside down, in fact. It's us that are the ones that do it. It's the entrepreneurs that do it, and the leaders will come along if we show the way. And the 4th thing I'll share is that New Mexico can be a leading light in this. In fact, the kinds of things you're doing here and the practices and the energy and events just like this are actually exactly what needs to be happening. So I'll share more about this, but let me start with this concept of the story of David and Goliath. There is the sense, like I was seeing when you read the news, we keep waiting for the leaders. We keep waiting for the big companies. We keep waiting for the people who are famous or rich to do stuff. And there's the sense that they're the ones that fix it for us. But what's really interesting, and you look at the data and the real examples of what happens in communities and even in countries that are rebooting themselves, it's not the Goliaths who lead, it's actually the Davids. The Davids are the ones that actually do more. In fact, the data and the research show that 1,000 Davids is more powerful than any Goliath can possibly be in terms of creating the energy and the momentum to make things better. So 1,000 Davids, starting with every David out there, is actually the key. And one of the reasons behind this, if you just look at very straightforward things such as job growth, as this was said earlier, I think, Stu, you mentioned this, that new businesses create almost all net job growth in the economy. And so when we look at older businesses, they actually don't create the net job growth, but that's where the attention seems to be paid in economic development, in the media, in our political lives. But only 18% of voters know this. This is a survey that we did of the American voting public and found that only 18% of Americans realized that net job growth comes from new businesses. They think it's bigger businesses and older businesses that actually create the jobs. And so here's the data that proves this. This is National Bureau of Economic Research data over about 2 decades. And that blue line are the young businesses that are 5 years or younger. And you can see over 2 decades, the blue line is way above 0. They are creating net job growth year in and year out. The other lines, the red line is for medium-aged businesses, and the gray line is for older businesses. And they actually, the older businesses actually shed jobs in tough times and never rehire again. They just sort of get back to 0. So older businesses kind of net out 0 or negative. Young businesses drive job growth. And we were just talking about this earlier with Stacy Sacco and others around workforce training. In fact, workforce development focuses on getting people placed into older or existing companies. But here's the data right here. If you're trying to place people into existing jobs, you're always talking about a net zero-sum game. You'll never actually create jobs. You have to focus on new job creation through new business creation. And so very simple equation, new companies equal new jobs. It's very simple. But it's amazing how little talked about this is. And so this is our job, those of us here who care about entrepreneurship, we need to get this message out that new companies equal new jobs. And I've spent time even within the Department of Commerce focused on this issue, and this is not part of the thinking, whether at the federal level or the state level or the local level. People just don't understand this. But the job of people who care about it is to talk about it, get this message out. New businesses not only create homegrown jobs, they also grow GDP. In fact, new business creation is a precursor to GDP growth. It actually is a leading indicator of where GDP is going. It increases lifetime incomes. Entrepreneurs make 10% more over their lifetimes than non-entrepreneurs. Not in the early years, because it's always a bit of a dip, but over time, they make more. It increases community wealth. For every 1% increase in entrepreneurship activity in a county, this is data from GoDaddy Venture Forward, it raises the average household income in a county by almost $500. So entrepreneurial creation actually has a ripple effect across an entire community. It diversifies goods and services. We saw this during COVID when we realized we didn't know how to make things anymore. Even things like hand sanitizer became difficult to do, and we were finding people who were doing it. So there's a challenge in how we make stuff again. So we have to diversify where stuff comes from, how we make stuff. And then it fights inequality and poverty. For every 1% increase in entrepreneurial activity in a state, there's a 2% corresponding decrease in the poverty rate in a state. New business creation, entrepreneurship fights poverty. This is not well talked about, but this is what the data shows. And the other thing about entrepreneurship, and this is remarkable, is that it's about the only major issue in America today that everyone agrees on. So this is the data this is the bipartisan poll that we put out, and we found that 94% of Americans agree, almost unanimously, that it's important to the future of the country that citizens should have a fair opportunity to start and grow their own business. 94%. In fact, our pollsters, who are two famous pollsters on the left and the right, were shocked. They said pretty much nothing, there are almost no issues that rise to this level, short of it's like a motherhood and apple pie type issues. So this is one of these things that's so core to the American DNA that we care about this almost unanimously across the country. Yet we don't do a lot about it. So there's this interesting thing that we actually care about it deeply, we all agree on it, but we don't do much about it. And so here's the bad news about all this, which is what I'm getting at, which is 81% of entrepreneurs say government favors big businesses over them. This is a survey that we did at the Kauffman Foundation when I was there. So there's a sense that the system is skewed against the entrepreneurs. 69% of entrepreneurs say government doesn't care about them at all, that we're just ignored in the system. And a big part of it is because this is a squeaky wheel country. If you're not a squeaky wheel, then no one pays attention. And entrepreneurs are too busy. They have no time and no money to squeak, and they don't make much noise. And so therefore, their issues and concerns and needs and challenges don't get talked about, and they don't get addressed. So there's an inherent flaw in the way the system works. The busiest, scrappiest, hardest working people don't have their voices heard in the system, like my parents. And then 41% of Americans would start their dream business in 6 months if they could. This is SBA survey data, yet only 2% of them do. So it's actually a small number of people that actually do this. So there's this gap between our country's entrepreneurial aspirations and what actually happens in reality. More data from our survey around people who want to start businesses but don't. Why don't they? And you can see the barriers come out here. This is where the data starts to show that we can actually do something about this. 76% of them say it's insufficient capital. So the capital markets are flawed. And that's a whole day. If we want to talk about that more, that's a whole day other conference we could do. But that's a big issue. But we can fix this. 53% couldn't afford government fees. Now, that's a self-inflicted wound. These are things that we do ourselves, and we're cutting out about half the people that want to start a business. 49% found confusing government requirements or forms, so they didn't start a business. 48% had a fear of losing health care. 34% couldn't get the right training or information. 32% said government services were poor. 30% said government approvals were too slow. 15% were held back by non-compete restriction, which is about a fifth of people in the country have some kind of contractual restriction that keeps them from even starting something on their own. So very broad-based. There's no silver bullet. This is what this shows, but it also shows these are problems within our control. We can actually do something about it as a society. So all this leads to, what do we do about it? And so this organization I founded 4.5 years ago is Right to Start. And the idea of Right to Start is to be that squeaky wheel, to be able to lift the voices of entrepreneurs up and have them heard. and to be able to do it in the system to drive the change in the system to break the barriers. In fact, the dream is that there should be zero barriers between people and their dreams. In fact, this is a picture from one of my road trips. This is in Indianapolis. And you can see that entrepreneurs come in all types. And one of the great exciting things about being on the road and meeting entrepreneurs is you see that there is so much energy there to do stuff. Yet as a society, we haven't learned how to respond to it very well. In fact, most of these issues get ignored. And so at Right to Start, we have this vision that we want to create a world where everyone can realize their fundamental right to entrepreneurial opportunity. In fact, by thinking of it as a right, we're changing the very nature of the debate. Just like you've got a right to speech or your right to worship, you have a right to be entrepreneurial. The system should not only not be a roadblock, we should actually support you in your endeavor. We should help you express that right. So our mission at Right to Start then is to drive civic change to eliminate those barriers for everyone to be able to realize that right. We're not just another special interest group looking for a little carve out or a little subsidy, which is the way, political systems tend to work. We are a basic fundamental right, which means every human being should care because it affects them. And so what we do at Right to Start is we lift the voices of entrepreneurs and grassroots up to the grass tops. We change policies by engaging policymakers, supporting policymakers, making changes to make a difference. 2, we change communities. We educate and mobilize citizens to take action to try to drive that change. And then 3, we change minds. We tell stories, we share information. We really get the message out there that this issue matters to people and it affects their lives. And so just in the last 4.5 years, we've made remarkable progress, and I'm very proud of this, which is we are now in 34 states and Washington with some kind of presence on the ground. And many thanks to our friends here at UNM and Lisa and the team for being supporters and partners of our work here in New Mexico. We have 74 people, ambassadors, advocates, team members, advisors all across the country. We've had 50 states. This is 15 states. We're in 50 states everywhere where there's some kind of conversation taking place around the Right to Start. 15 state legislatures have introduced over 40 pieces of legislation based on our recommendations and ideas to improve the environment. And then 6 states in the last 18 months have actually implemented our recommendations, at the core of which is actually creating offices of entrepreneurship or lead officials in states to drive entrepreneurship. And then countless cities have done similar things as well. So you can see this work has really spread remarkably in the last few years, and it actually is growing exponentially. And then we do things like grassroots engagement. These are actual photos from what we do. We do things like petition drives. We do workshops. We do meetups. We do policymaker sessions, public educational sessions, just to share this information, the kind of things I'm telling you to get the message out. We do policy impact. This is a bill signing in Nevada with Governor Lombardo. We've been in state capitals all over the country. We've actually made a real habit of some people take pictures of like baseball stadiums or whatever. We take pictures of state capitals. It's kind of a policy nerd thing to do. And we've built a remarkable team of people. This is, I'm actually really excited. We decided to take this moment, this invitation to come here to turn this into our quarterly team meeting because we're a virtual team. So my team is like here. And so you can see, raise your hands, team. So we got team members from Right to Start from all over the place, all over the country, from East Coast to West Coast. And one of the things we want to be able to do is if you're interested in being part of our work, our team is here, and please talk with them. So memorize all their faces quickly because they're here and we want to engage you in this work. And so New Mexico holds this special place because what you're doing here provides a path for the nation. There is the way that you think about the rainforest and innovate ABQ. The ability to connect all these different parts of the system together is especially in a disparate place where you have so many people spread across so many different geographies is so critical. And to have a hub that people can go to and have events like this, I've been able to, and even doing work in the tribal communities with the Tribal Enhancement Program and the network of tribal ambassadors that you have with the work, bringing in a place where Sandia and Los Alamos can connect and do things together, be able to integrate with the universities and the students and the life of the innovation and the technology coming out of this university, to be able to serve as a hub for the community and build that rainforest ecosystem is critical. And so there's a number of, and you've seen this in the data coming out. This work it's not immediate, but over time it starts to really happen. And I've seen some of the data and statistics. things are really happening here in New Mexico that are very special. So I'm inspired by the work that's been happening here, because what you've been able to do, it's sort of in the rainforest concept. This is a diagram right out of the rainforest book, which is the connection point of all these different things. And the thing about entrepreneurship, as opposed to other issues, it's not a silver bullet issue. You can't just do one thing and expect it all to work. You've got to connect the whole ecosystem together. And all these different elements are pieces of it. And you can see all of these different elements happening in a place like this and in the work in New Mexico, which is there's an attempt and real progress in making it all come together and to start to come to life. And so that's been really exciting to see. And I congratulate you, and I'm excited to see how it continues to grow and progress over time. So to renew America as a whole, the answer is actually pretty simple, which is more of this. We need to unleash more of this spirit everywhere. This ability to connect, to build ecosystems, to drive this kind of change from the bottom up. America will be rebirthed and renewed and rebooted, not from the top down, but by people leading from the bottom up. And so what's been happening here in New Mexico is exactly that, and it's been very inspiring and exciting to see. I mentioned the story of David and Goliath earlier, and I'm going to end with this story of David and Goliath. So this is a picture of a David. You might have seen this David before. I actually took this photo myself when I was there on our post-COVID family trip to Italy that had been postponed for a couple of years. All of you have stories like that. And this is David, and of course, this is a well-known statue. But one of the really interesting things is why it's such a well-known statue, which not a lot of people know. Beside it being a beautiful, remarkable, gigantic, detailed statue, is that this is a very different statue than all the David statues that had been built before. So when Michelangelo made this, he actually took a different take on it. So the other David statues that had been made before in Florence and other places were of David having conquered the giant already. So it's usually David standing atop the head of the giant after the head had been cut off, or standing victorious. And what's interesting about this David, and you can see it, is that this David still has the rock in his hand. That is, he hasn't actually defeated the giant yet. And that's what makes this story beautiful, because it's David in the process of deciding to take action. It's David in the process of saying, I think I'm going to go take on that giant. And you can actually see this too if you look now and you realize what makes the statue special is to see it in the eyes of this David. This is David not having said, I'm done, I did the job. It's David in the idea of looking out over the hill saying, I'm going to take on that really hard thing. And this really resonated with me because of the work that I do. And I realized that this is the entrepreneurial spirit. This is that moment of decision, the moment of action, where someone says, that looks really hard. It's never been done before, but I'm going to go do that thing, which is what entrepreneurs do. And so when I think of David and Goliath, and I think of this statue, it's very inspiring to me because it actually is that hard part. It's not the easy part after you've won. It's the hard part when you're in the process of becoming and going to do something. So this story is very universal. It actually goes deeper than just our work here today. It's actually deep in human history. It's very deep in the human DNA. And one of the operating ideas at Right to Start is this idea that we are all born starters, makers, doers, dreamers, that we are all David inside, that we all have that element of wanting to go do something, take on that giant, take on that really hard thing. And so at Right to Start, we are doing it, and we want your help. And so one of the really beautiful things that we want to do, as if we're going to build from the bottom up, we've got to organize from the bottom up. And so we have started and are launching this New Mexico Starters Coalition, which is a coalition of people that care about these issues and want to join and activate. And so we've got our team here. Courtney Zog, Catherine Reed, these are people leading our field work. Raise your hands so people can know how to find you. If you want to join the New Mexico Starters Coalition, please look for them. We're also hosting a gathering, a happy hour tomorrow for those of you interested in joining. We'll talk more about this and get you involved in this. But this is what we're trying to do, and we want to really launch this and get this going. And then if you want to join and you're able to do it right now, you can actually use your QR code and join up right now. So this is you can sign our statement of principles, and this will actually pull you into the Starters Coalition for New Mexico. So you can sign up right now. And what the statement says is basically this, which is we are born to be starters, makers, doers, dreamers. Each of us has a fundamental right to realize an idea, create something of value, and pursue our entrepreneurial dreams. That simplest of ideas, that all of us have this right to start, is basic to the human condition. And when that right is widespread, prosperity ripples across millions of lives in the form of jobs, productivity, dynamism, and opportunity. It's time to unleash that right in all of us, regardless of race, place, background, or walk of life. That means breaking down barriers and giving all of us opportunities to start, grow, and flourish. So I encourage you all to join. Thank you so much for being part of this important effort. Thank you for being active members and contributors and builders of this ecosystem in the beautiful, enchanted state of New Mexico. And I look forward to getting to know more of you and continuing to be part of the great work you're doing here. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, all of you.
Victor, do we have time for a few questions? Okay. All right. Any questions from the audience? This is your opportunity. Okay. Yes.
Group talk with some founders. Can you share some of your findings on that for New Mexico?
A group talk with founders, you mean like a few weeks ago, or? I'd say that was an early one. We didn't do a lot of soliciting of feedback on it, but we're going to be doing more of that. So tomorrow, and we're getting going. So we're just getting going on this thing. I'd say, I don't know if the team has any quick feedback. I don't think we really gathered that much data. It was more to share out what we were up to and to start to get people interested. But then part of that is going to be really engaging people to understand how they want to take it. One of the big shifts we're going to be taking this year in 2025 is to really give people the tools to take this work on themselves in their own way, because we can only do so much as a small team. And so we're interested in learning more. So the quick answer is not enough, and we'll be doing more of it.
Yes, David.
Yeah, in addition to the spirit or the initiative that people want to do to develop these entrepreneurs, there's a lot of data, for example, National Academy of Science, et cetera. I'm sorry. Hello? You can hear me? All right. There's a lot of data, for example, there's numerous studies that have come out of the National Academy of Science showing that one of the major drivers, and you can go all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, is science and technological advancement. And it takes that in addition to this spirit of entrepreneurship. So I was just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the question around science and technology and the role of that in economic growth and development. It's sort of the full life cycle, right, of how ideas are born through science and innovation, and how they get propagated into enterprises that create the products. So it's sort of this line. And I would say a couple thoughts on it. One is it's not a straight line, which is the way it gets talked about in like books, right, or diagrams, and which is science and innovation, which kind of gets spun out and licensed, which gets turned into a business, et cetera. And that sort of happens, but I've been involved in this stuff for a while now. It's like a zigzag that's constantly going back and forth. It's the interplay between, like, even when companies spin out, just the interplay back into the research system is constant. And so the breakdown, and I was just in Detroit last week, when the auto industry got started in Detroit, the combustion engine was a new technology, but there were 200 auto companies at the time, all in that ecosystem trying to figure it out before it turned into a handful over the decades. And so that interplay between the idea, the technological innovation, the application of it, the ecosystem of attempts to experiment to turn it into enterprises, and that constant iterative process of how you siphon that down into something that can become sustaining, it's very nonlinear. And so I think that's one of the errors that often gets made in economic development, is to think of it as one or the other. And that's been a bit of the issue, because coming out of even the last century, even through the 80s and the 90s, the view became almost bifurcated, that there was science and technology over here, and there were small businesses over there, and there had to be some kind of like a manual bridge or toll bridge that you kind of put across it. And I think what reality shows, and people who've lived this experience will validate this, is just it's this nonlinear, rich interaction of this. It's the full ecosystem, and so you can't say it's just one or the other, but it's all critical and all bound together. You need, and I've done science-based startups out of universities. It's just this rich interplay of all the relationships and ideas and flows between them. The other thing I will say is the technology has, in some ways, has changed the game now, where they've created platform tools that allow people to build things out of them. You can wake up, one morning in your bathrobe, you can go on a computer and you can prototype a new idea, you can design it, you can manufacture it, you can distribute it and sell it, and you can reach, consumers all over the world in a day from your bathrobe. Like we have those tools now that allow you to actually innovate at scale. And so the idea that innovation only comes from sort of one institution as opposed to the whole ecosystem, and being able to create platforms that allow people to do things at scale is sort of a different way of thinking of it. And so my experience has been that great new enterprises are built everywhere now, and innovation comes in so many different shapes and forms now. Intuit did a study recently through the Small Business Index, and they found that almost 90% of businesses now are tech-enabled businesses. So there's the line is blurred very much between what's a tech company and what's not a tech company. Almost everything is a tech company in some way or other today. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a good start. Happy to talk more.
Another question. Yes.
So when you were in town, and God, that's loud. Sorry. And you had mentioned the importance of having an Office of Entrepreneurship. So New Mexico has one now, which is amazing. Can you share a little bit more about other policy changes that you guys have advocated on and other legislators have picked up?
Sure. So the Office of Entrepreneurship has been key, and New Mexico has been great in having someone designated at that within the state level. And I know that there's interest in even trying to move legislation around that to try to expand it and formalize it and provide it even more support. The Office of Entrepreneurship, and I'll give you an example of the bills that were passed in Nevada and Missouri, the Right to Start Acts there. They actually created an Office of Entrepreneurship and part of the role of that office now is to provide regular recommendations to the legislature and the governor on what else can be done to clear barriers for entrepreneurs and make it easier to improve the entrepreneurial environment. So it becomes like this ongoing, like a perpetual motion machine for ongoing improvement. They also have goals on opening up government contracts. Government contracts tend to go to larger incumbent firms. They don't tend to go to new entrants. And so opening that up and actually setting metrics and goals around that. They also have recommendations and processes for streamlining, cutting red tape to make processes easier. So in Nevada, for instance, the idea is that office becomes the red tape cutter for entrepreneurs in the state. What I'll also say is there's actually some issues that we're going to be raising more this year. I'll give you a preview of it that actually really hit home for a lot of entrepreneurs. One, and this is an issue that almost never gets talked about, which is home mortgages. So those of you that have actually started businesses know that the home mortgage industry is based on salaried employees. And so you have to have a W-2, they look for payroll stubs. And then the moment you decide to start a business, actually for the first couple of years, they don't care how much revenue you're making from your startup company. They don't care what your net worth is. All they care about is these W-2s. So we've actually got a mortgage industry that discriminates against entrepreneurs. And so that becomes a real stumbling block. And that can be fixed. We can actually say you are not allowed to discriminate against entrepreneurs. You should count 1099 income, you should count LLC income, you should count your new business income as part of your mortgage application and treat that with respect. So that's one thing we're going to start to tackle this year. Also things like childcare. Well, and this is one of the things I learned from the road trip is just, I knew the issue was pervasive, but hearing people talk about it firsthand and thinking about what could be done has changed our thinking on it. That one of the interesting things about childcare is that it's actually not a deductible expense on self-employment income. And so there's lots of things that are deductible for self-employment, but childcare expenses are not. So that should be, and it doesn't make sense because there's a lot of people that wouldn't be able to do their job if it wasn't for finding affordable childcare. At the very least, it should be deductible, and there's all issues around subsidies and tax credits as well that we can get into as well on that. And so there's things like that that can be done that actually need to be talked about more. So we're going to be rolling out a set of ideas this year that actually start to crystallize things like this, like home mortgages like childcare that really start to speak to a lot of the concerns of ordinary entrepreneurs more and more.
Another question. Someone over there, I
Yeah.
can't see.
But by the way, I'll just add to that as they're getting a mic to it. There's a number of other issues also around what we can do. If you think about the way that the workforce system I talked about, right now we have $13 billion of workforce money that flows into training people to fill jobs as opposed to training people to create their own jobs and build their own businesses. Changing that, opening up the government contracting system, the way economic development flows in the state. Economic development tends to go towards big company attraction, retention, subsidization, recruitment, as opposed to helping people build their own. So we've set goals around that for states. And there's this really interesting question of the investment council here and the sovereign money, what can be done. And there are ways to do this, and that's actually a bigger discussion that we might be able to target. New Mexico is truly unique, New Mexico and Alaska with these sovereign funds that you could do something with. And given that it's a sovereign fund, it doesn't just need to be in the business of getting traditional sort of financial return on investment. It's a sovereign fund. You can do what you want. If you look at the examples in the Emirates, the Middle East, in Singapore, those sovereign funds become major drivers of economic growth. And they're targeted strategically to drive entrepreneurial development and technological and innovation development. It can be done. You just need leadership and creativity and good ideas. And that's something worth really talking about in a state like this with that special opportunity.
Okay, a question over here, and then Merrick.
Hi, Victor. Thank you so much for your time. You mentioned a little bit about the 80s and 90s approach to economic development. I'm curious, as your team is doing this work around the country, how have economic development organizations and agencies, how have you not tried to change them, but how have you seen that their strategy might be adjusting, given that we are moving more towards this like entrepreneurial-led economic development?
Yeah, that's a great, the shift right now, and some of you may know this, but most people don't know this, is because it's sort of the secret revolution that's happening, which is the way that the economic development industry as an industry works is significantly changing right now. Part of it is the work of, there's a group called the International Economic Development Council, and they have done a remarkable transformation just in the last couple of years in terms of validating this whole idea that there is a form of economic development called entrepreneurship-led economic development. This 5+ years ago the term didn't even really exist, barely existed. Now it's actually becoming more widespread. And just this conference this past fall, their annual summit, entrepreneurship was like half the conference. I mean, it's really transformed dramatically. Now, that is the leadership of IEDC and sort of what the leadership says it should go. That does not mean the economic development establishment is all there yet. There's still a lot of it that's kind of rooted in the past. But it's one of these cases where the industry needs to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time. They can't give up the big company work and the big company development, but they've got to learn to do this other half, which is to build from the bottom up and support entrepreneurial development. So that is a shift that's happening. I think it's one of these things that's going to take time in terms of education and support. But the membership, a lot of the membership actually cares about this, because when they poll the members, they say entrepreneurship is usually, the number 1 or 2 issue within economic development today. But it's interesting if you spend time with people in communities that have been hard hit and you ask them about economic development, they'll say entrepreneurship is the only game in town for the hardest hit places, because they can't recruit big companies. All they've got is the ability to grow from within. And so what they found historically is that the tools haven't been there. They don't have the tools in economic development to really do entrepreneurship-based economic development. The fact that it is even becoming a thing is really important, and that's going to continue to grow. I think a big part of it is in terms of how do we accelerate the shift. It comes from the citizenry, people like this, driving the people in economic development. So when people in the entrepreneurial ecosystem talk to the people running economic development councils, economic development corporations, whether it's city or state or county leadership doing economic development, and saying, by the way, have you considered this other approach, and can we help you do it? That makes a big difference, because again, they hardly hear about this. I will say one of the big drivers for Right to Start, as I mentioned, is that we need to raise this issue, because you think someone else is talking about it. And what I've learned is they're not. And so if we don't talk about it and raise the issue, it won't get heard. So we can accelerate that by just making noise. Yeah, please.
At the IEDC conference, Vanessa Roanhorse, right, who is a
Yep.
local champion advocate. CEO,
Amazing woman. Yeah.
She was on the plenary stage,
Yep.
right? And so I think, yeah, some validation to that point of seems to be like things are changing.
Yeah, there's a new leader there, phenomenal guy, Nathan Oley. They put folks like Vanessa on stage, front and center. Really, the tone of economic development is shifting, but it's going to take years. But we can do our part to make it go faster.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Merrick has a question.
So you're very right that most of the workforce development attention is towards large companies. What role do you see for university, specifically UNM, to actually pay more attention to small companies? What can universities do about it?
Yeah. What's really, well, one, I think the shift in what universities, the role that universities play has been profound, right? Universities just in the last 10, 15 years have really moved into this economic development leadership role that maybe was quieter before, but now is very much front and center in the role of universities. And it's become something that leadership cares a lot about. I think the next shift, and this is going to take a long time to happen, which is to go from treating entrepreneurship and innovation as a side piece of universities. You know, so many universities have entrepreneurship centers. They have entrepreneurship classes and courses people can take. They have maker spaces people can use. But they're all treated as on the fringe or kind of like a side option for students. I think the shift, and this is going to happen across not just higher ed, but across K through 12, is to move entrepreneurial skills into sort of the core of learning. And the reason I say that is because I've been out there and there are so many places where that's starting to happen now, and it's going to continue to grow. One example is at Marshall University, which is a public university in West Virginia, the southern half of West Virginia. And the new president at Marshall University is Brad Smith. So he was the former CEO of Intuit, and he moved there to take over the presidency of Marshall University. Within the first semester at being at Marshall, he made it a requirement that every freshman take a workshop in design thinking, which I think may be the first major sort of public university to actually require design thinking for everybody, not just as an optional thing that you might take if you're interested. And the reason he did it, I've spent a lot of time with Brad on this, is he said, I want students to feel scrappy, like they can solve any problem in the world. Because in West Virginia, they often are at the bottom of many rankings, and they often struggle to get recognition, and they often deal with these challenges of economic development. And his point is that if the graduates from a major public university, all of them don't know how to problem solve and create value in the world, then they're going to struggle after they leave college. And I've spent time with students who've gone through these design thinking workshops, and it's transformational because these are people that they lacked a sense of agency or empowerment. They felt like they couldn't solve problems. And now they realize there's a methodology to solve any problem in the world that's ever thrown at them. And it has a huge, profound effect on people, and I've seen it firsthand. The other thing I've seen at the K through 12 level, and there's a network of schools now, there's about 150 schools across the country now, basically at the level of classrooms or schools, they're actually trying to build curriculum to actually do applied real-world learning. So that means entrepreneurial skills in a broad sense, not just building an enterprise, but project-based learning, design thinking, basically real-world problem solving, apprenticeship-like programs. And some of these are major public school systems across the country involved in this new model of learning. The issue with education and the challenge is you can innovate at the individual classroom or even the individual school, but they're always somehow working around the system to do it because the teacher training, the teacher credentialing, the stackable credentials, the testing system, the college entrance system is all based on last century's industrial model. And so you can teach entrepreneurial skills, but the system doesn't reward it or incentivize it or make it easier right now. And so that's a shift that needs to happen over the coming decade or two. And it's percolating and there's effort, but we can do more. Like we can actually raise this issue and actually say, look, can we get kids to learn project-based learning, financial skills, design thinking into classrooms all the way from kindergarten on up, all the way through higher ed. That's so I think we have to mainstream this issue, not treat it like a cute side thing, which it's often gets treated as. So that's my observation. Well, I don't know if that answers your question.
It sure does. Thank you. We only have design in the engineering at UNM, not for everybody, and certainly not at the freshman, but at the senior level. So that's a very interesting concept.
Why not universalize it, right?
Yeah.
Why not? Why can't every major have the design thinking skills to take what they know and apply it into the world? I mean, it's a simple question,
Oh,
right?
it can be
But I think
done.
it often gets treated as a thing on the side, not something core.
You're right.
Yeah.
So Lisa asked me to jump in on this, James Holloway, provost at the University of New Mexico. So, I think Victor's point about centralizing it is a really good one, and that's not something that University of New Mexico does, but there are actually lots of opportunities to develop design thinking. There's a interdisciplinary design certificate, which is open to everyone at the institution. Of course, there are a number of disciplines in the arts, in architecture, landscape architecture, and so on, for which design is really core. So I did just, and I'll also mention the Innovation Academy, in which entrepreneurship is the focus, but there's opportunities to create experiences around design. So I did want to make the point that it's a more broadly available at UNM than just in engineering, and at multiple levels. But it's not central or core in the way that Victor's describing, which is a very interesting idea.
To the point, it's hard to that's a massive adjustment in the way you think of academia, and it's easier at Marshall. And plus, I think, Brad Smith coming in had a huge ability to kind of drive that change, given his sort of role and influence. But it's difficult, and so I think a lot of it is us making noise to do it, to help. It can't just come from the top down. It's got to come from the community saying this is what we want as well.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. I think we're out of time
Thank you,
now.
Lisa.
Really appreciate your Q&A and your comments. Thank you.